Hi guys, welcome to another BigLipz podcast. As always, my name is Kathryn. Joined with me is my good friend Sam Macaulay Blair. As always, we are two former film students, kind of independent filmmakers. We've done 2 seasons of the BigLipz podcast. Now we're on season 2, which is specifically about TV. So normally how it's broken up is a content and a concept episode, where we kind of discuss all different things in regards to TV. So this week we're going for a content episode again, and this time we've chosen to speak about HBOs House of the Dragon. So yeah, of course, it is a kind of prequel to, or it's kind of a prequel, but it's in the same universe as the kind of Game of Thrones series. This is based on the Song of Ice and Fire novels and things. So yeah, it's pretty fairly recent. I do remember it coming out like literally just a few months ago. So yeah, I do remember there being a lot of hype around it. Like, obviously we've spoken in the past about Game of Thrones, how it's such a massive thing. It changed TV, blah blah blah. So yeah, Sam, we'll just start with, of course, a classic. What were your kind of overall thoughts when you were watching it, even like from kind of going into it and then on the watching, and then maybe even like if your opinion kind of changed as it like stewed over time?
Very good question. I think I think honestly, I think the show was better than I thought it was going to be, but that makes it sound like I had like low or negative expectations. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to say like slightly better than I thought it was going to be. But
I love that, because then that does not sound like high praise at all. It was slightly better than
that's what I mean. Like, I honestly, I thought it was an absolutely terrific show. I did think before it came out, I kind of thought, I was like, okay, well, it's been a few years since Game of Thrones finished. Mm-hmm. It's pretty well known the general consensus of how that show wrapped up.
Yeah.
The sort of public like thought. And one of the most interesting things I think that I've seen mentioned is the fact that like Game of Thrones, when it was on, was everywhere. It was so big. There's a Christmas special of Doctor Who where they have like references to Game of Thrones in it, and it's set in the Victorian times, so it's in no way like
that's weird.
Doesn't make it's very like anachronistic, but they just have like it's like lines like winter's coming and stuff, and you can tell it's very much like winking at the audience. Mm-hmm. And that was when the show just started as well. That was like 2012 that episode came out. Anyway, yeah, so Game of Thrones obviously when it was on was absolutely everywhere, and then it ended. And then it's just like no one wanted to talk about it. Like It just disappeared from like all conversations. People were very ashamed of it. It's like a one night stand that they regretted. It was it just, or like a bad relationship, and because like that show went on for a very long time. So a one night stand's maybe not the best like analogy there. Hell of a night, but.
The long night, some might say.
Yeah, oh yeah, there we go. That's what it meant. But yeah, so I did kind of think, and especially because I don't know, did you know about were you following any of the news about like because this wasn't the only prequel series in development, or the only like spin-off series in development. Have you followed any of this stuff over the last few years?
No, and purely because I've spoken about it before, I've hinted at it, that I really, really didn't like the end of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because I was watching it like in tandem with the final season of Orange is the New Black, which I thought was so much better. So it did, I feel, suffer from that as well. But I mean, it was pretty terrible.
I'll be honest, you're the first person I've ever
I think I like Orange is the New Black more than most people.
No, I mean, like, it's a very well liked show, and I know people that like it. You're literally the first I've ever heard someone say I think the reason I didn't like the end of Game of Thrones is because I really liked the end of Orange is the New Black. I just wasn't expecting that, so fair enough.
Fair. I've noticed that the longer we do the podcast, I've noticed how like fickle I am, and my opinions change on like on like the edge of a knife.
Yeah,
but honestly,
that is very true. Doesn't take much to tip the scales with you.
No, it's such random things. Like I just happened, bad luck for one show that I was happened to be watching another show at the same time. So because of in terms of that, I hadn't really been following it. I do remember. One thing I really remember is ages and ages ago seeing like a still from House of the Dragon, and it was Matt Damon on the beach, kind of talking to who I now know as Rhaenyra, but I remember at the time seeing it and seeing him in that blonde wig and thinking, Jesus Christ, this is going to be difficult to sit through. Yeah. And I genuinely, like, when I knew it was coming out, I wasn't massively fussed about watching it. I think even when I did watch it, it was because it was just curiosity more than like anticipation, I'd say.
Did you watch it right from when episode 1 came out? Were you like, oh, I'm going to watch it? Like, you watched it like immediately, or did you wait a wee bit and then go, okay, I'm now going to watch it?
So I watched it straight away, and that's partly because people in my work have no concept of the fact that other people don't watch live TV. Yeah. So that is partly the reason that I started watching it like as and when it came out. But yeah, I think I wanted to kind of like when I was watching the end of Game of Thrones, I was watching it kind of as it came out, and there was something nice about that kind of
hype.
Yeah, like and you experience it at the time, and then you can immediately go when like articles and that are fresh, you can go back to it. So that's kind of why, that's another reason I kind of started with House of Dragon kind of as and when it aired. What about you? Is that how you watched it?
Yeah. I've still not actually answered like your question. I'm taking a really, really long time to like.
Just stalling for time.
No, but like, so to go back to what I was saying about the like, you know, the few years since Game of Thrones, and so this isn't, like I said, this isn't the only spin-off that they got in development, and it's not the only one that they have developed. There was another spin-off where they spent like something crazy. It might have been 30 million. I think maybe less than that, but it was like a crazy amount of money they spent on a pilot episode for a spin-off. Ooh. And obviously the pilot season or whatever, they obviously like aired it to like a bunch of networks and stuff, and it did not do well. And they just kind of like wrote the whole thing off. They were like, yeah, okay, cool, we're just going to bury this. So that show got cancelled.
Do you know who that, or what period or what kind of family that was following? Do you know?
I think
off the top of your head?
It was about the White Walkers.
Okay, I can see why it would be cancelled or not picked up.
I think like no, but like not like just them hanging out in the north. I think it's like back like a prequel, but like much further back.
Yeah.
Not just like the CGI blue people just cutting about and like not saying anything to each other.
It was the same time frame as actual Game of Thrones, but like we were seeing it from their point of view.
Yeah, what they were up to the whole time.
Exactly.
What annoyed them. They had, I can't remember, there was someone was attached as well, because I remember seeing stories, but I wasn't following any of the stuff with like, I wasn't like, oh my god, Game of Thrones like spin-offs. I was kind of annoyed that I knew why they were doing it, but I was kind of like, just leave it be.
Yeah.
And I just kind of knew about the stuff because I follow like general movie and TV news. But yeah, basically, apparently what happened was after like the complete failure of that like pilot, there was like a big meeting, and I think the agreement that was made was like, okay, which is actually kind of a surprise that they did this. They were like, right, rather than do that again, rather than like spending all this money and developing another, pilot that might end up being terrible, they were like, why don't we just go all in? They were like, why don't we just actually just like say, okay, do you know what? We're just going to do like a 10 episode season, and we're going to put like all the money into that, and we're going to make it and just hope that it delivers. So that was basically how House of the Dragon got like greenlit and got made. That was like the idea behind it, was like, we're just going to go all in, and this is like our shot. So it was a big roll of the dice, and it kind of was like, if it had tanked, then there probably wouldn't be any more Game of Thrones spin-offs. The others probably would have just been like silently buried. But yeah, so that's like a bit of context. And so knowing this and kind of, again, just from like stuff that I'd heard, or not that I'd heard, but like just even on the look of it and stuff, my kind of thoughts were like, you know, I thought it was going to be good. I was like, okay, you know, they know what's at stake here. You know, they're taking a big risk. They know that like they've seen what happened to Game of Thrones after it kind of like didn't meet people's expectations. They kind of need to redeem themselves a bit. So I kind of thought it would be quite a safe show in some ways. And, you know, House of the Dragon, being about the Targaryens and stuff, I was like, there's an element of safety there. But yeah, I did think, I remember having a conversation with a friend a few months ago, and us discussing like being looking forward to it, and I was like, I'm not like hyped for it really. I was like, I will watch it when it comes out. I was like, I think it's going to be a good show. I think I'll like the show. And yeah, so in that sense my expectations were met, but I did actually think it was like a better show than I thought it was going to be, especially for like the first series of a show. So yeah, the very, very, very long-winded answer is that I thought it was a terrific first season.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. Like I said, my hopes weren't massively high going in. I think as well, it's funny, I wanted to mention like my bestie, she's really into like kind of world building and the lore and stuff like that. So
of
a Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah, so she's got a lot of like the kind of like companion books and stuff that do like that delve into a lot of what a House of the Dragon goes into and all the different Targaryens and that. And one of her bugbears with these with this in particular is that it's specifically about the Targaryens. I think her issue is that, in her opinion, there's a lot more like interesting characters, which is fair because at times it's pretty. Do you know what I mean? It's like pretty similar to Game of Thrones. There's like a family, and then a kind of opposing family fighting for the throne. Like we've seen that before.
It is the same like political drama stuff that you saw with like violence, and it very much is just like more Game of Thrones. Which again, I think that's the thing. I think that was the thing, was like I think that's why I wasn't like, oh my god, counting down the days, even though I thought it was going to be good. I think that wasn't why I was like, I'm super excited for it, because I think it being about the Targaryens, I was like, okay, it's going to be very limited in scope, because Game of Thrones was really interesting because we were jumping all around, and you had this massive world that was built very, very well, effectively, and you're living in all these different parts of it. So I did kind of think, I was like, okay, just being about one family isn't going to be that interesting, and because it's a prequel, we know that like the stakes aren't kind of the same, and
because you kind of eventually know how it turns out. Exactly.
So I think, but I did worry that it was going to be a bit dull, and I think that's the thing. It did surprise me with there was a lot more meat to it than I kind of expected. It was much juicier and more interesting, and had more kind of things to say than I thought it would. So I did very much appreciate that, and I could see, again, it makes sense that they would go with a Targaryen spin-off, and it would be very similar to Game of Thrones, because again, they kind of needed it to be. It's like when they did Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and they just played it as like safe as they could while doing a new thing, because they were like, well, we kind of have to make, people didn't like the Star Wars prequels, and we kind of want to we need to prove ourselves and kind of like redeem the franchise. I think it's the same kind of thing they were going for, but I think they did it a lot more successfully than Star Wars did. Yeah,
fair. So to move on, obviously, like you were saying, Game of Thrones in particular had like multiple different characters and multiple different families to follow, but this one was obviously the kind of main Targaryen family, and then there was a couple of different families in there, but in terms of, I wanted to discuss, and I specify just memorable characters, because I feel like there was, I'll get so there's good and bad in there. So I'll let you start if you want to go through your memorable characters, good, bad, just hate beyond measure.
I'm going to struggle with names, because again, they'll have Game of Thronesy names, and I'm not going to lie, even though obviously I watched the whole season of it, I still feel like, when I watched the first season of Game of Thrones, I definitely would have struggled to regurgitate most of the names in that.
I got legit, how many seasons of Game of Thrones were there?
8.
I was still on like season 6, being like, what's his name again?
I think I from it, I can't even remember when. I read the first few books at one point, and that definitely helped with like me.
Sam, I've read the books twice.
Fair enough.
Still don't have their names. Like I do it as well. Obviously we've spoken about Lord of the Rings. It's got that same kind of obviously massive big world. Everyone's got weird names, and I think people. I'm not a huge fan of films, but people hate watching them with me because I'm like, what's his name again? Or I'm like, is that such and such his dad? Like somebody's gran. Like, what's your name again, son?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Game of Thrones, I do feel like it almost like has fun with like it being very difficult because a lot of names sound very similar, and they sound again they're like a lot of names are like similar to real names but not actually, and then you have the odd person like Sam, just like thrown in there, and John, but like like
John,
of course they'd be friends, but yeah, like it is a bit difficult to regurgitate a lot of the names.
I wouldn't worry because I definitely had to Google people's names when I was writing my notes. Fair.
I'm just gonna go with like descriptions for some of them. But I think, to be honest, I think the show did a really, really good job of creating memorable characters. I think obviously I'll go with the big ones first. You have like a Daemon Targaryen, who was obviously like, I mean, you could tell from the get-go that the show had like a focus on him, and the show kind of knew that he would be like a very interesting character to follow, and there's a reverence. And I'm pretty sure like George R. R. Martin, I think the character of Daemon Targaryen is one of his favourite characters that he's created, and I knew that going in, so I kind of thought, okay, I'm a huge Matt Smith fan as well, so I knew going in. I do agree as well, like you were saying before, about the set photos with him in the wig, because I did see that as well and think I thought the same thing, but I wasn't sure if that's just because like I so know Matt Smith with like his actual hair that it was just I was like, I can't not see that as a wig because it is very clearly not his hair.
Yep, 100%.
But yeah, anyway, so Daemon Targaryen I thought was like a very, very interesting character. They did a really good job of like, there's a real tension any sort of time he's, especially like earlier in the season, I think, anytime he's on screen, because like you really don't know what he's going to do. And it's always, Game of Thrones sort of thrives with characters, or that world sort of thrives with characters like that, where when they're in a scene, people genuinely are not safe. I was kind of surprised by the end of like the first season how few people he just like on the cuff wiped out.
Just annihilated.
I think there was that one guy that delivered him that message in like episode 3, and then the other guy who's like face he sliced in half. But there wasn't actually as much. I thought he was going to do a bit more of that than he did.
But yeah, there was a couple of times I was watching it and something would happen, like, and my first thought was, oh, how is Damon going to react to that news?
Yeah. I'm with you there.
Yeah.
Other standouts, obviously the protagonist, the main character, the Queen, Rhaenyra. She was absolutely terrific. Yep. Very, very like very compelling character, and a lot of depth there. And I sort of appreciated how at the start she was obviously like, she really wanted to be queen, and that was like a really big thing for her, especially because they had a queen. And I kind of thought that was just going to, that was going to be her whole thing through the whole thing. Like it was going to be like, I just want to be the queen, and why can't people let me be the queen? But I really like the fact that when she was older, she said, she's like, I don't want this. Like I don't want to really be queen anymore. I kind of just want like it's horrible. I'm sick of this like feud and this tension and all this like. And that was like a kind of reoccurring theme, especially towards the end among characters, and I did really appreciate that. Like it felt just a little more interesting that like the people who were at the centre of this sort of bid for power, they kind of wanted out, and it was really the people surrounding them. They're like, that had like trapped them in this circle, and were kind of playing them. On that note, you have people like Otto Hightower, again, very interesting character, and yeah. Again, they do some interesting stuff with him, and he's a funny one because he kind of like gets written out for like a little bit of the season and then comes back. It's just like a bit where he's not really like a character anymore. And then his daughter, obviously, Alicent Hightower. Also, again, I loved the whole, the sort of is it there was like to me I thought there was like a sort of romantic relationship between the Queen and her. They don't ever actually like confirm as much, but it did feel like they had that sort of like dynamic, to the point I actually thought, I just assumed that that's what it was, and then I remember reading like reviews and like discussions and stuff on it, and like seeing reviews mention, oh, her friend, the Queen's friend, and I was like, is she not, are they not like a thing? And then I was like, I guess they never actually say that, and yeah, I just found it interesting that like some people just read it as like, nope, totally platonic thing. So I was like, it didn't feel that way to me.
They were close friends.
Yeah, yes they were. Reading books under trees in the sun, on their laps, and but yeah, her arc was really good, and again that whole thing I liked. Again, she didn't, she was kind of like, she was like a piece on the board, and she was like put there by her dad, who sent her to like console the king, and obviously like
she did.
Yeah, I know. But I like how, for her it was about, and her dad kind of plays her, and he's very much like, oh, by the way, like, if you don't really like stand by your kids and push for them to be like theirs, then that your ex might bash their skulls in. And that was, it was a really clever and interesting way to sort of play them against each other, and it did feel really authentic and believable. And yeah, I like that. I liked her. I'm gonna end up listing like most of the characters here. I liked. I didn't like, but I again, another interesting character was. I think people have called him, what is it, little toe, the one, the guy with the foot fetish.
That was weird. Yeah, that I feel like that came out. I mean, it kind of made sense. He clearly had, I assume, like a clubbed foot or something. So like, and it kind of made sense. But I'm like,
feet were on his mind.
Yeah, I'm like, I didn't need to see that.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah, Westeros did not need a Quentin Tarantino.
No.
But yeah, he again was another one where like he was obviously sort of pulling the strings, and he had like sort of people everywhere, and kind of knew it was up. And again, it was just like it was an interesting character to have. Like anytime he sort of was in a scene, you were like, okay, well, he's got something juicy. He's someone with very full sleeves. And again, he's not like a likable character, but I like the fact that he's not. He's an interesting character. He's someone that has a lot of bearing on the story, despite not being in it that much.
He's quite ruthless as well.
That whole bit where he like sacrifices his family. I was like, you guess like you're committed to this.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I really liked, obviously, of the children, the one with the eye patch, who just reminds me, I don't even know, like, it just, for me, every time I see him, I just think of How to Train Your Dragon, and I don't really know why.
Okay, fair.
I just think he's like an amalgamation of like characters from that movie, and obviously he does ride a dragon as well.
Yeah, fair. I can't remember his name. Is it Aegon, maybe?
No, Aegon's like the actual, I'm going to become king son. Oh, that was the other one. The king. Paddy Considine obviously played him in King Viserys, and he was absolutely terrific. Again, it's so incredible how they managed to turn, because he's really not a sympathetic character when you meet him. Obviously, like, sacrifices his wife because he's so much obsessed with like this idea of having a son and these dreams he's had, and they do such a good job of like humanizing him and making him sympathetic. And again, it's interesting because he was quite, in a sense, weak. He was very much like, he always kind of like pussyfooted around doing anything and making decisions, and he was always very much like, I want everyone to get along, and people were not getting along.
Yeah, I love that scene as well when they're having that family dinner, and everyone is like tension, got the tension with the knife, and he's like, I'm so glad we're all here having dinner. Yeah.
Everyone, I just love you all so much. Everyone's so happy and gets along, and it's great.
And that's what he's like, oh, it's glad to see so many smiling faces.
Yeah, not a man who can read the room. But and someone really likes his models as well. But and obviously even like the whole him being with Alicent, who obviously was like significantly younger, and again the whole like maybe had a relationship with his daughter thing. Yep. Again, like, in the first few episodes, it feels like the show does a lot to be like, don't like this guy, but then does a lot to kind of win you round on it. And I appreciate the fact that it did that, because it's quite a ballsy move to make for a show to do. Again, especially a show that is itself a gamble. Really liked his character, and I'll stop there. I think just because like I am going to end up listing like pretty much every single character. I think maybe the last one I'd like to shout out to is I can't remember her name, but the one that bursts through like the ground on a dragon.
Her name is very similar to Rhaenyra. I think, is it Rhaenys?
Oh yeah, that's right. Because there was a few times that she was mentioned, I think, by like other characters, and I just thought they were talking about like the main character.
I think I only knew that because I googled it. I had to Google it today.
Fair. Who were yours?
So we had a few of the same ones. So Rhaenyra, obviously, I feel like she has, because she was pretty restrained like throughout. I felt there's a lot more potential for her to just absolutely snap, and that's the fact that we've not seen her do that. She kind of pretty much keeps her cool. Because even like there's that moment where Alicent kind of snaps and goes at her with a knife.
Yeah.
And during that point, she's still calm, and that like absolute restraint all the way throughout is just going to make it so much better when she finally does snap.
Yes.
Another one obviously was Otto Hightower. This is a funny one because I feel like he's like he kind of makes my skin crawl. I think part of that, here's me being fickle again, is because he reminds me of a previous boss that I used to have who was just a horrible human being. So there's a little bit of that in there. But I feel like he does, Rhys Ifans obviously does such a great job. He's so like, his character's so like skiving and ambitious, and he obviously he's obviously clever to get as far as he does, but I think he thinks he's a lot more clever than he is. And it's so fun to watch. I feel like, just to talk about Game of Thrones really quickly, like I feel like that's what Cersei Lannister thought she was. Yeah. But she just wasn't, and it was painful to watch. Whereas his is a lot more interesting to watch.
I feel like, to Cersei Lannister's defence, she was surrounded by a lot more people who were like really, really good at the whole like scheming and like, you know, people who are really on the ball.
I feel like all of the Lannister children thought they were so clever and smart, and really I'm like, you need to take a few more lessons for your dad on that one. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, I do feel like Cersei Lannister had much tougher competition. Like I think intellectually, like the sort of people in court and House of the Dragon, you know, you have like Otto Hightower and then you have like Little Toe, but like other than that, like I don't think, and I guess Daemon, but it didn't really feel like he was like, I also didn't feel like he was like super like sharp and schemy. It kind of felt like he was more like a sort of like loose cannon. I didn't think he wasn't one for like intellectual chess as much. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop interrupting.
No, fair. So he was one. The other person I really wanted to mention was Sir Criston Cole, and I feel like I have rarely hated a TV character in my life more than I hate him.
He was really hated, wasn't he?
He was the worst. He was just, oh geez, even just thinking about it makes me angry. Like, it wasn't even like a love to hate thing where you like love watching this villain. It was just sheer hatred. He was just so pathetic. Like, I'm sure I read somewhere that Rhaenyra at the start was like 14. So basically he's been chosen for the Kingsguard. He's taken this oath. He has sex with a 14-year-old girl once, and then that's it. He's butthurt for the rest of his life. And it's just, it just infuriates me.
Man caught feelings fast on that one.
Yeah, and hard. Like, she's just out there living her life. She was like, I don't think she ever made any allusions to the like, oh, we can be together forever. Like, mate, you made that up. And then so him being so like, just the entire, for like how long, the amount, obviously there's time jumps that we'll talk about later on, but like there's years and years pass and he's still pining over her, and not in like a sad way, in like a murderous way.
He just like is perpetually bitter, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the most bitter person ever. And I feel like him as a character, obviously he murders I can't remember the character's name.
Yeah, I know exactly the guy you mean.
Yeah, he murders him in a rage. Because he said something about Rhaenyra, and then later on there's that old man at the small council table. He just slams his head on, murders him as well. I feel like he would be such a better character if he was just like evil and he was just bad. But the fact that he's doing all that and in reality he's just like pathetic. Really, so I've gone on a massive ramble here, but I couldn't help it. I just wanted to get my thoughts out there.
No, I think it's interesting because he's kind of like, he's almost like a reverse trope, like because he does the kind of the way they go for, you know, the way they kind of set up his character initially or introduce him, and even the way he looks is he's kind of like a sort of Prince Charming type. You know, he's almost like he would be the protagonist in your average like fantasy show or like story where, you know, he's a good looking guy from like a humble family and he gets sort of picked, and you know he obviously has this like close connection with the Queen. And I like the fact that, you know, he's like the sort of perfect like love interest normally, and I love the fact that they do make him this really like bitter, sort of jealous like he's the one that gets really attached and can't get over the fact that like to her it was just like a fling, and I like the fact that it's like a reverse trope, but I do agree that he is just like immensely hateable. You just like really don't like him.
Yeah, it's not even in a fun way. Like every time he was on screen, I could feel my blood start to boil. And obviously you spoke about the King, the series. I think he was like you were saying, he was such an interesting character because he was so like almost like naive.
Yeah.
To the point where he was just thought the best of everyone, despite all of the evidence that these people were not good.
I guess that's the interesting thing about being the king, though, isn't it? Is like in theory you're only ever really going to see the best of people because everyone's kissing your ass, aren't they?
Yeah. I do like that he stuck to his guns and he was like, no, even on his deathbed, he was like, no, I said Rhaenyra was going to be is my heir, so that's who the heir is. So yeah, props to him for that.
Yeah, I that's a very good point. I actually did really appreciate that about him as well. Like he did fully commit to when he said it. He didn't like go back on it. He was like, nah, like I did mean that. And
I wonder if he'd have done that because he did that before his son was born.
No, he did it. Well, yeah, with Alicent, but he did it after he'd lost the other son, didn't he?
Yeah. I think, was it before he remarried? I can't remember, but.
I think yes, I think it was before he remarried, but there was like courtship going on.
Mm-hmm. She was being sent to his room.
Yeah, to read him books, read him bedtime stories.
Books. Yeah. Cool. So, like similar to Game of Thrones, I feel like House of the Dragon had its fair share of like big moments. So obviously there was a lot of like articles and things like that I saw a lot of the time about like the different birthing scenes, which I thought was a bit random. Not the actual scenes, but like the absolute like I can't think of the word, like they're just this. They were just like zoning in on the birthing scenes as opposed to like, I mean, there was like 10 hours of content, and then that would seem to be all the articles that I saw. But I would argue that there was the bigger moments than those, or potentially if you want to speak about them. But in general, what were the kind of best moments from the show for you, or the kind of like biggest, most shocking moments?
I think like there was some moments early on, like obviously the first sort of birthing scene, and the jousting competition, and like the Daemon's city watch, you know, when they go through the city, and kind of like enact justice, and moments like that. And I think it's maybe the opening of episode 2 with like the crab guy, and he's doing his weird crab stuff. Oh no, he's like fighting a guy, and then Daemon Dragon comes down and like crushes him when he thinks he's gonna be saved. Like moments like that early on did actually land for me, and I thought like, you know, it was good to have them because you kind of forget. I think because of like it's Game of Thrones stopped being as brutal towards the end. You know, it did develop like plot armor, and it did become like, it felt a lot safer, which is weird because obviously the stakes should have been so much higher. It did feel like it felt a lot more written, and I guess like predictable in some ways, and so it was kind of nice for House of the Dragon to like reestablish this is a really dark world, and we're going to show that, and we're going to be honest about that, and it's the same with like the sort of like again like this for the arranged marriages or the proposed marriages between like older men and like kids,
like literal children,
and having stuff like that, and also the same goes for like I knew they were going to do the incest thing because I was like, it's Targaryens. I was like, there's no way they're making a show about Targaryens and not doing like an incest thing. And I did think right from I think the very first scene between Daemon and Rhaenyra, I was like, that kind of surprised me because I obviously knew that at that point you're like, she's the protagonist. And I was like, there's sexual tension here, and I was like, I thought there was going to be incest, but I was kind of surprised at like how like that first scene with them, the sexual tension there, and that just I thought was an interesting thing to do right out the gate. But like so, all those things were quite nice in the sense that like it was good to know that the show wasn't messing around, because I think that's one of the things that universe does so well is it does feel really brutal, it does feel really bleak, and it makes the drama so much more exciting because like you genuinely any conflict. It just the stakes are a lot higher when there's any sort of tension, any conflict. Like there was that scene where like the kids start scrapping and obviously one of them loses an eye. And I was on the edge of my seat for that because I was like, one or multiple of these kids could die right now. Like I fully believe that, and that's not something you can say for a lot of shows.
About many TV shows,
like it's really not to have a scene where kids are fighting and you actually believe that like most of them might be about to die.
That's such a fair point.
I really appreciated that, and like again, Game of Thrones did that so well as like this political drama. Where like you were like, okay, like there's these people aren't just scheming, but they really will hurt each other. And allegiances can shift pretty fast, and people can go from being like, I'm your best friend or like potential lover to like I am literally holding a knife in your face and trying to gut you. So those moments were good. Those moments were lovely. One moment that I really liked was, this was actually a character that I probably should have spoke about when you were asked about memorable characters, because and there was another one that had like a sort of small role but actually did leave a big impression, was I think it was Sir Lenore, the Rhaenyra's
husband,
beard,
she was his beard.
And like I liked the sort of like they had their open relationship, and again I like the whole thing of like him eventually kind of like him being a bit like crap as like a husband and just kind of like taking advantage of the open part and less of the relationship part.
There was that amazing moment after she'd had like it's when the time jump has just happened and she's having the third baby, and he comes in and he's like, oh, was it terribly painful? I remember that being so funny, because that was like at that point you hadn't seen any of the other children, so it wasn't yet revealed that basically she wasn't having his kids. So it was such a nice moment where you're like, God, why are you speaking to her like that if she's just delivered your baby? Exactly.
And I think they did a good job making him feel a bit like meek, and you not like I didn't like hate him or anything, but you didn't really root for the guy very much. And then I think they did do a good job of kind of redeeming him in that scene where he's like, I've not been very good at this, and I am sorry. And he's like, this is where my head kind of my heart needs to be, and I'm now committed to this. And then like the next scene is her being like, so we're gonna kill this guy, and that was a nice sort of turn, and it did something that like that universe never does basically, and he actually like they make sure that he gets away safe, and he gets to go.
They just let him sail away into like his nice little.
Like he's literally the only character in that universe to ever get like a happy ending. And he generally like his life was generally pretty good. Like
he was just out there living it. I feel like that was such a nice moment as well, because up until that point I was watching and I was like, surely that seems so out of character for her to actually kill him. They seemed to have like they got on well enough. Do you know what I mean? And it felt like something potentially that Daemon would do, but it felt so out of character for her. So it was a nice moment where it was revealed that she hadn't actually done it, and then that kind of sacrifice where she's willing to like obviously his family are certain that she had a hand in it because they all think he's dead. So that was such like a nice moment of her being like almost like friendship, where she was like, "I'll take that one for you," so that, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, it was a sort of selfless, like slight bullet taking, and yeah, obviously they did do it like with, and even the fact that he's alive, I think um, is like an act of charity that, you know, because he's a loose end, and I did
Yeah.
think, I didn't worry that he was gonna, you know, he wasn't done for the season and he was gonna get pulled back into it, and there would be like, some way that would come back to bite her in the ass, and that still might happen further down the line. But at the moment, it does seem like he got away and is generally like fine, and yeah, I like that. Like, it's just that in that universe, that is a nice surprise, but it felt.
Yeah.
So it felt really like poignant just because it was that one character.
Yeah.
And it's nice that it's not like, you don't get that very often, and it was just nice that the show did that. It's like when Black Mirror did the San Junipero episodes, and it was just like the show's like only happy episode at that point. And I remember just like everyone being like, "Wow, we needed that."
Yeah, that was a breath of
how
fresh
much
air.
we needed that. So that's what that kind of felt like. And then yeah, I think the king, just like every episode he was in, was like a surprise.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah, there was
like,
a point where he was just clinging on by his fingertips, and every time,
Yeah.
you're so right, because we would come into another episode, and I was like, he's still here. Like, fair play.
Yeah, and I didn't. At first, I kind of thought I was rolling my eyes a little bit, but I didn't realize how much the show was kind of playing with that until you really see him at the end, and I was like, okay, the show wants you to have that reaction. The show wants
Yeah.
you to be like, oh my god, he's still alive, and they make a point of being like, this is hellish for him. Like, he doesn't want
Yeah.
this, and he's being kept this way because of like political gain. So yeah, which again, yeah, I just thought was really interesting. And yeah, so that was quite cool.
Yeah.
I think
sorry, I just,
No.
my friend reminded me as well, like, there's the whole point, or there's a whole bit in the books where, like, if you're not meant to sit the Iron Throne, it'll cut you, and I think that's kind of hinted how he got, like, his first kind of infected bit,
Yeah.
and then that's just kind of spread into this horrible disease. So I feel like that's such like it's such like, because it's a hard one, because like we're saying, he's so like, I think at one point after he dies, Hightower calls him something like Viserys the Peaceful. So
Yeah.
he's made sure that the realm is peaceful, but he's obviously not been a good enough king. There's obviously like still dissension and whatnot. So having that be like the way that he, or the implied way that he has died, is because the throne has cut him, and then over the years it's just like manifested inside him and has gotten worse and worse. I feel like that's a lot more interesting than like Game of Thrones, for example, where someone just gets banjoed by a boar.
Yeah. The slow death thing was very interesting, and a very different way of doing like the death of the king. And yeah, it contributed to this like escalating tension, didn't it? And, I looking back, I appreciate how long they kind of like held that character and kept him, and the way that they kind of used that to really put all the pieces to where they need to be, so that when he dies, it obviously like it is the most dramatically like powerful like point. So yeah. And even just the way they handled it, like it being the end of the episode and it just kind of like cut into black and him just hearing his voice and stuff, was just like really, really beautifully done. And obviously there was like an air of improvisation as well, and the way that it was like filmed apparently, which I thought was really cool. Like again, it just that stuff was really, really well done to me. And as for like other big sort of shocking moments, I did really like the end of, I think it's the second last episode, where obviously the one we're talking about, it's not, what's her name,
Rhaenyra.
Rhaenys, that's it, yeah. When she burst through on Dragonback.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think that was so good because of the fact that like the setup for that was like near invisible. Where obviously they'd had, the younger kid, Eye Patch Kid, basically take someone else's dragon, when they died, and obviously the king's dead, and you're
It
aware
was
the
her.
king's
Yeah, it was
dead.
her daughter's dragon, wasn't it? I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she takes. I assume she takes, because I don't think they actually tell you, but she takes the King Viserys' dragon, doesn't she? That's that. I mean, that was the connection I made, because I thought, like, obviously, the last time someone died, her,
their
like,
dragon
her
was
daughter. And she obviously, because obviously she's just found out the king's dead, and that's why she's been like, hurried at the city or smuggled at the city. She obviously, she sees what's at the stairs down, and she obviously makes that connection of like, oh wait, there's a dragon. There's a dragon up for grabs, and he's downstairs. I'm gonna get him.
Love it.
So yeah, I love the fact that it didn't. I mean, again, I think that's what happened there. And I love the fact that it doesn't tell you that. It doesn't like.
Yeah.
But you understand. You're able to like make that connection and go. I understand why she's like come up on Dragonback. Like what it. Again, it's like exposited very, very cleverly, so that like they can have that surprising moment, but have it make sense.
I loved. Sorry, just to expand on that particular point, there was that amazing moment where she's there. She's got all the power now because she's on top of this dragon, and she's facing the. Like a high tower and the new king, and it's within her grasp to end it, to kill all of the royal family basically. But there's an amazing moment where she kind of looks like she's going to do it, and then it's Alicent kind of steps in front of the king, and there's obviously, when you think back, this is a woman whose 2 of her children in her eyes are dead, and essentially what she's seen is just a mum, like another mother trying to protect her kids. And like she does say later on that it wasn't her war to start, but I think there's that little bit in there of like that she's like, the women in the show are a lot more like compassionate, because they're a lot more like see the value of life and things, whereas Daemon in particular just starts chopping people's heads off. That horrible Cole guy, like so it was such a nice like kind of defining moment to be like, they're not all completely heartless. Do you know what I mean? They've got it was a nice moment to you see that they've got different motivations, and not just her, like the fact that Alicent steps in front of everyone where all the other guys kind of step back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there is that. Yeah, again, it handles like the femininity and like, as you say, the value of life and everything, and just like the level-headedness, which you can't often say for someone who's just like stolen a dragon and burst through the floor. So yeah, like I did appreciate that as well, because it's a nice bit of character work there, and again, it could feel like a very contrived thing that she let them live, and I think some people do. I've read online and stuff. I think people were annoyed by that, her doing that. But to me, I did believe it. It did make
it would have been a
sense,
very short series as well had she done
it. Well, that's why people were complaining, because it felt a bit written. But I get from like the character's perspective, because like, she could have wiped these people out and it would have like obviously technically like resolved the conflict. But then she has just like murdered like royal family, like members of the royal family, and like that would be that's as a target on her back.
Yeah, because they would still be heirs. Like, fair enough, Rhaenyra's got children, so they would be heirs first. But then, had she died and all of her children died, then it would be the boy that was crowned king. So technically, they're still heirs.
Exactly. It would be a very, very like
sticky
big
situation.
thing to do. Yeah, exactly, and it would give her a lot of attention that I assume she did not want. So I kind of get her just being like, there was a sort of mutual respect thing of like, where she, to me, also kind of felt like she was being like, see, I could do this, I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I could do this right now, and I'm not gonna do that, and don't forget this. And then flies away. And so again, it felt I liked that. One of the moments I want to mention kind of quickly was that I really liked as well, you mentioned before, like the dinner time scene, and that thing that again came as a really nice moment and really nice surprise was there was a sort of like brief sort of reparation between Rhaenyra and Alicent, and that was just a really nice sort of touching moment I didn't expect. Again, it was just it was something that like I didn't expect the show to do that before, like obviously pulling them apart again like properly and sort of forever. So that was a really nice moment. I thought it was really well done, and again it felt really like authentic And it was nice that like they just had a moment where like finally they were like actually on the same page again.
Yeah,
So
and that's that thing as well. We kind of spoke. I can't remember which podcast we were speaking about it. I think it was the horror TV one, where these moments of kind of like peace are what makes everything else so much more dramatic. Because if you get a moment of respite, then when it starts to ramp up again, it's so much worse. It's like
exactly.
a reset almost.
You look at like the Red Wedding episode of Game of Thrones, Reigns of Castamere, and the thing that I think people forget that's so effective about that episode is the episode. It's kind of like it's a bit like a comedy. Like the episode before all that goes down, like it's very light-hearted in tone. There's a lot of like humor. Like it is all played very like it sits on one end of the spectrum for quite a long time before like the end of it swings so hard the other way, and that's why it's so effective and so well done. Because like when obviously the needle drops and when everything like goes down, it does feel like, oh my god, like that took a turn. So I think that universe does things like that very well. I guess that's the whole idea of like weddings and murder, and it's nice when they have like nice moments.
Just
because
so
they
much
are
nicer for it.
Few and far between. Yeah, exactly, and they do have a lot more value. Those are kind of my big ones. What were yours?
So I know I was giving them a hard time, but one of mine was a birth scene. Right, I feel like the because there was a fair few, like more like enough that it was talked about. The first few were obviously pretty traumatic, but that last one when Rhaenyra gives birth to that stillborn baby was insane. And the fact, like I said, the other ones were like traumatic, but they were watchable. But then, except I was watching with my fiance at the time, and he said that the noises of the first few scenes were a wee bit much for him, which I thought was quite funny. But yeah, that last one, and just watching her like grab that baby by the head and just yank it out was insane. That's the most hardcore thing I have ever seen in my life. And I feel like there was just such a moment where you don't know, obviously, was she thinking about the fact that, well, you do, because she gets flashes of the dragon, but, like, she was obviously thinking of the fact that Daemon's first wife, she was having a baby that she couldn't deliver, so she went and basically sacrificed herself to this dragon. And I think there's also that element of she's just found out that the king is dead, so there's a little bit of that element of, like, stuff's got to get done. Do you know what I mean? Like she can't be hanging around here all day.
Pragmatism, Like, do you know what? Like, let's just come on.
Like, let's just get this over with. I've got stuff to be doing. Kingdoms to be ruling.
Bigger fish to fry.
Yes. So that was like insane. That was a nice moment where it was weirdly it felt like a really, really urgent. And obviously the fact that it came just after the king had died just kind of ramped it up a lot more. Another one we've spoken about was obviously Rhaenys bursting up through the floor. Another one was Alison Hightower as a character that really, really grew on me as it went out. At first, obviously, it started, she was just like kind of an annoying like teenage girl. Do you know that way where she was so...
a little bit Sansa Starkey.
A little bit Sansa. I was just about to say that. And then when she had that moment where she's already late to, I can't even know, they're having some kind of dinner. Is it for Rhaenyra's wedding or something, or betrothal? And she's already late, and then she turns up and she makes this grand entrance as absolute power play, where she's wearing like the green and it's explained to you that when the High Towers call the banners to war, it's like a green beacon.
Yeah.
And then the doors open and there she is in this green dress, like interrupting the king. It was such like a power play where it felt like it was her making that decision as opposed to her dad or whatnot. So that was...
Yeah, it was a really nice bit of agency, wasn't it, for that character?
Yeah, it was such like a nice, like, such a public statement for her to be like, no, we're doing what I want, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the last...
Yeah, and I think...
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, yeah, and I think it is kind of like her first real show of strength as a character. I think up to that point she is kind of a bit sort of simpering and weak, and again, it's nice when you do see her sort of harden, and like you say, it's a very, very like, you don't expect it from her. So it was very nicely done.
And then the last one I wanted to mention was the kind of very last moment where Rhaenyra finds out that her son Lucerys, I think his name is dead, eaten by a dragon. A dragon flown by Eye Patch Kids, no less. So,
How to Train Your Dragon.
How to Train Your Dragon. And I feel like it's such, we spoke about cliffhangers recently. It's such like a perfect and almost effortless cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Where they just turn around and it's such a close shot of her face when she is, and this is the moment, like I was talking about before, this is the moment where she snaps.
Yeah.
And it's going to be so good. And I feel like it was a clever choice. It was the younger boy, the boy that she sent close to home because she didn't want to send him too far away. And she had to reassure him, oh, you're going as a messenger, not a warrior. Nothing's going to happen to you. And then he gets eaten by a dragon.
Yeah, something happens though.
Something happens. And there was also a lovely moment there where Eye Patch Kid, How to Train Your Dragon, you could tell that wasn't his intention. Like, once it had happened, he was horrified. So that was interesting, because up until then he'd just been a bit of a stereotype of like just a kind of ruthless evil
really
person.
Angry.
Yeah. I'm so angry and pouty.
I just have a lot of angst.
Yeah, he had some pout on him, that boy.
I know, excellent pout. 10 out of 10.
One thing I thought was really good about that scene that we didn't see is going to be how Alicent's going to react to that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like she's going to be horrified, because even though there was the moment where she tried to take his eye, I feel like there's going to be...
They got interest in that one, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. So like there's obviously like so many rules with kind of the Song of Ice and Fire. Like you were talking about the Red Wedding, that was so shocking because the kind of rules of having guest right, I think it's called. That's like such a big thing. So I feel like the fact that he was just a messenger and that like the Baratheon Lord protected him from, he was like, you're not fighting in this hall, he's just a messenger, blah, blah, blah. And then for that to be done, because they're not going to, I wouldn't believe Eye Patch Kid if he told me that it was an accident.
My dragon accidentally ate the kids that I regularly spat with.
Exactly. So yeah, the fallout from that I think is going to be really interesting. Specifically for those two, potentially three characters in particular.
Yeah. Big agree.
So obviously we've spoken a lot about Game of Thrones. Do you think that it's a prerequisite to watch Game of Thrones before this, or would you recommend that someone does watch Game of Thrones before House of the Dragon?
It's a very interesting question. I think... I mean, it's a big investment watching all of Game of Thrones before it. I think it's an interesting... Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing... And I kind of know some people who have like gone through that, or I know of people who've like watched it without having seen Game of Thrones. And I would probably say like jump on this, and Game of Thrones is there after if you like this stuff. But I would say like House of the Dragon starts a lot stronger than Game of Thrones started, and Game of Thrones started strong. But I do think, especially with like if you go back and watch season 1, it is obviously like the rougher of the. It's not the it's not the roughest Game of Thrones series, but I do think it does show its age a little bit, and obviously it was like pretty groundbreaking in its time. But I think I said before that like I didn't love Game of Thrones from episode 1. I kind of like kept watching it because it ends on a great cliffhanger. And yeah, there was intrigue and stuff there, but I wasn't like fully sold on it by the end of episode 1. And I do think, especially I've rewatched season 1 a couple of times, and I do think it does stand out a bit. I think you said as well, the kid actors and stuff, and it was huge for what it did to TV, and for what it did for storytelling, and it broke a lot of ground, and it is a really like influential and instrumental piece of like media for that reason. But that doesn't mean it's not. It doesn't. I don't think it does a good job of selling just how good it's going to get.
Yeah.
And House of the Dragon, I think, does start off a lot stronger. And I think it is very accessible for people that, you know, there obviously are references like the whole Song of Ice and Fire thing to Game of Thrones. But it doesn't, you know, you could watch it and not have seen without having seen Game of Thrones, and I think that would work as a sort of nice tease. I think you would maybe be a bit like, oh, I'm kind of curious how that's going to pan out. So I think if anything, it would kind of help your interest and your intrigue for the main series. So yeah, I think I would say watch House of the Dragon first. Get on this while it's actually like ongoing. And, you know, because if you missed out with Game of Thrones, that is a shame. Like, as much as obviously we were hurt by the end of Game of Thrones, it was nice to be part of. It was nice to be part of the like zeitgeist of it all, and the collective reactions and speculations, and it just was cool to be part of like the fandom for it. And I think it would be nice for people that missed out on that to get to experience that with House of the Dragon, because it's nice to have that back. It's nice to have that, like, to have people care about that universe and to be like loving it again. So yeah, I would say watch it. One thing I will say quickly, from someone I know that has watched it without having seen Game of Thrones, is they were very, very surprised and obviously very struck by the incest stuff, because
I love it. Do you know what's so funny? It's scary how quickly, like, when I was watching it at one point when they were trying to kind of find a match for Rhaenyra, I said out loud, I was like, why doesn't she just marry Daemon? That's the smart thing. And that's what I said. Like, it's weird how quickly you become accustomed to it. Like, that makes sense that they should marry. Not that they would, that they should.
Yeah, and that's it. You kind of you do kind of forget, you don't realise just how much 8 seasons of Game of Thrones did get you very like desensitized.
Yeah.
Almost on board with incest. And if you haven't seen it,
if it's going to strengthen the bloodline, then come on.
Exactly, and the show does kind of like know that about its viewership, and watching it without having seen Game of Thrones is a lot, I imagine, much more of a whoa their experience than that we get. What about you? Would you recommend House of the Dragon first?
I think you made such a good point. I definitely think it is such a nice kind of introduction into the world. Obviously, when you've watched Game of Thrones first, you have an understanding of Westeros, and although it's not massively important in House of the Dragon, obviously, because they mainly stay within kind of Dragonstone and King's Landing. But I feel like it was just like a nice, like you're saying, it's nice to be kind of back in that world where you recognise the names of people and you can kind of piece together, like, oh yeah, there's like some funny moments where if you've seen it, like where one of the characters had said something like, oh, there's never been a Stark to go back on his word, like, and that's very much a thing in Game of Thrones. And so there is nice little tidbits like that. But yeah, I definitely think it would be, if you've not seen it, if you've missed the boat on Game of Thrones, it would be a good idea to watch this first, because then, like you're saying, you can kind of get on board with it as and when it's happening. I think it would be really interesting as well if you just watched, obviously it's only the first season that's out now, so if you watched that and then watched Game of Thrones, it would be interesting to kind of try and, because they've picked, I can't remember how many years it is, but it's like, is it hundreds? It must be hundreds of years.
It's a few hundred, yeah.
Yeah, before, obviously, the kind of story with Game of Thrones. So it would be interesting, having watched House of the Dragon and then to jump straight into Game of Thrones, to try and suss out, because they do explain it to a certain extent, try and suss out what happened in the meantime. Yeah. That would just be like a nice little, it's a boring exercise for yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I've rewatched the first 3 seasons of Game of Thrones, like, I think once or twice, and obviously I have seen all of Game of Thrones, and like I said, read some of the books and stuff. But it has been a while now, and it would be interesting. I'd be interested to know, what watching House of the Dragon first would do to your, like. I'd just be curious of like how that would affect the way that you viewed maybe Game of Thrones and viewed characters. I wonder if it would change anything. I wonder if you would like. Yeah, I'd just be curious to see if you would just take Game of Thrones the same way that you would take it if you watched the first, or if it would change any of your perceptions or give you any sort of, if you'd maybe like get ahead of the show in some places because of it. Yeah, I'd be interested to see.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting point. In a similar kind of vein, obviously we have throughout the podcast kind of compared it a lot to Game of Thrones, but like as in specifics, maybe how do you think it compares to Game of Thrones? For me personally, I think I prefer House of the Dragon to Game of Thrones. But in fairness to Game of Thrones, I think that's because I view that as a whole. And I think the bad, for me, kind of outweighs the good with Game of Thrones. Like, when Game of Thrones was good, it was very good. But when it was bad, it was very bad.
I think that's the thing. I think when you know that Game of Thrones ends the way it does, and I think that's the thing, is there's so many good moments in Game of Thrones. There's so many like huge moments, so many like really well done moments, great episodes and stuff. And yeah, it is kind of painful when you know now that it doesn't pay things off anywhere near to like the degree that you kind of like hoped and dreamed that it would. And the implication of like some of the best moments were so good because of like the implication of like, you know, like Hardhome, that episode of Game of Thrones where like Jon Snow was like north of the wall, and then like the White Walkers just come out of nowhere and just like massacre everyone basically. That was so good because it really raised the stakes, and it really reminded you like, okay, these guys are the problem. You know, this is like the ultimate sort of threat, and then that's not really what they are in the end.
Yeah.
So the show does kind of like go back on itself a bit there, and yeah. So I think, like you say, it's almost like there is a, I guess, like Crispin Cole, we're all a little bit bitter towards Game of Thrones, and it is kind of hard to, you can't even really appreciate like the great moments as much because you know that like, you know, you're like, oh, I was young and naive and thought thought it was always going to be like this, and it wasn't. So even like the great moments now kind of hurt a little bit. That said, there's still moments that I think are intact, like Hold the Door, and I think my favorite moment in all of Game of Thrones, and it's a weird moment to pick as like my favorite moment, but I think my favorite moment in all of Game of Thrones and the whole canon is in season 7 of all like.
Controversial.
Of all no, genuinely. But it's the moment where Jaime Lannister, it's the whole like caravan convoy thing, and it's Jaime Lannister and Bronn, and then Daenerys and like her troops attack, and it's just that moment where Jaime Lannister sees a dragon for the first time, because they do such a good job of like, I think earlier in that episode, Cersei's like, you know, people keep saying Daenerys has these dragons. And anyone's seen these dragons, like, you know, of course, you know, that's exactly what you would want to do. That's exactly what she would do, is make people think that she's got dragons when they don't. So I like that they put that idea out there. And obviously at this point, you know, dragons they've been in, you know, people in Westeros have heard, but they haven't really come to Westeros yet. And obviously it's been 7 seasons, Daenerys, you're watching
she spent a lot of time across the Narrow Sea.
Exactly, and right from the start, you're like, you know, you're watching her, and you know the trajectory of the character. You know that they're pointing her towards Westeros, and it's all about her coming back, basically. But yeah, so to me, that was like one of the best payoffs the show did, because it was just like, just the look on his face where it was like, oh, okay, they're real, and obviously it's flying towards him, and it's just to me it was just such a perfectly done moment. And it's you don't really get moments like that very often in anything, you know, 7 seasons of something building up and actually paying off and sticking the landing on that moment. So that to me is like the high of the whole thing. But I do think House of the Dragon is, like I said, much stronger as a first season, and it does feel like an evolved version of the best sort of storytelling Game of Thrones had to offer. There's a real sort of subtlety and nuance to it that I really like. It's very good at like not having characters say things and not even having them like fully react. Like so many of the reaction shots are just kind of like a character's like very, very, very slight facial change. Yeah. And I
which is how you would behave, because if you were like, it's not like the way that you or I could have a conversation or whatever, like a genuine people's lives are at stake here. Like, you would have to learn how to control your face. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly, and it's so good at communicating. It's such a good like example of how much you can communicate with how little, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need characters spelling things out. You can deliver, you can tell a character's heart with like genuinely just like a slight facial change, and I think that's so interesting, and yeah, it's so good the show knows that. So yeah, I think right now, and again, you can tell, like, I think George R. R. Martin's come out and said he thinks that 4 seasons is what the show needs to tell its story. And it feels like part of the reason he's saying that is because he's basically, by saying that and by that getting loads of like publicity, he's basically like, HBO now kind of have to, and the showrunners now have to be like, okay, 4 seasons is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Again, everyone feels like Game of Thrones didn't have the episodes it needed, didn't have like the scope it needed in the end, and so yeah, it feels like they're not going to make that same mistake again. And I think the idea of it being like a 4-season thing, being shorter and sweeter, I just think is a nicer thing. Like, you're not, it will be a lot more satisfying. And there's, I think it's not going to snowball to this huge thing that Game of Thrones did, where it has so many ridiculous things to pay off that almost could possibly ever deliver. So I think the scope of it's like much more manageable. So I do think it's going to be a much more satisfying like whole when it's done.
Perfect. Basically, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said that House of Dragon was a lot more nuanced than Game of Thrones. I feel like that's just like one of the really obvious ones for me anyway for House of the Dragon was the kind of the female characters in the show. Obviously, I spoke about the kind of moment where Rhaenys pops through the floor in her dragon. There's that little moment of like where she chooses not to kill them, and I feel like one of my issues with Game of Thrones is that I feel like most of the characters, but the female characters maybe more obviously, were very much like almost like caricatures or cliches. So like Arya was always like wild and ruthless, and Ygritte was like this crazy wildling woman. Everyone I feel hates on Sansa, but I feel like Sansa is no joke one of my favourite characters, because I feel like she's the only one that has any kind of like growth and development. Dany,
I got a 180s in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, Dany obviously has her kind of, she starts as meek, kind of weak, and then she goes all the way up, and then in a split second she comes all the way crashing back down.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the problem, isn't it? With like, again, with this now knowing the full shape of Game of Thrones, is like a lot of the characters. If we were just having this, if we're talking about the characters in like season 6 or 7 even, then yeah, we probably would think a lot more highly of them. But yeah, like you say, a lot of them kind of they're going really in a really interesting trajectory, like Jaime Lannister.
Right? Yeah, that's another good one.
And then at the very last minute, they kind of just be like, haha, gotcha, and then walk it back or do something a bit like dumb and a bit, more predictable and almost safer.
Yeah, so I feel like in terms of just like the kind of like female characters in Game of Thrones, there was a lot more, I feel like they had a lot more like depth, in that almost like they had, because I feel like they maybe had like a lot more power than in Game of Thrones, and in such a subtle way. Like you were saying, it's a lot more subtle. It's not like they're like Arya's character where she was just like obnoxious and loud. I wasn't a fan of Arya, but but like we've spoken about Rhaenyra and how she's got this kind of like, she's very restrained the whole way through, and she does it for a reason. She's not doing it because that's who she is as a person. She's doing it because she knows that's how she has to behave. That's what she has to do. So yeah, I feel like in basic terms, there's a lot more of kind of like nuance basically to the characters. There's obviously this kind of, and it's the same in Game of Thrones, but I feel like again it's better done in House of Dragon. It's this kind of idea of like the mother character, because thinking about Game of Thrones, obviously you've got Cersei Lannister, and I feel like obviously she's devastated when Joffrey dies, but then she's always going on about the other ones, but she doesn't really. Do you know what I mean? I don't feel that there's that. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but do you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel that's potentially the acting. But I feel like in House of the Dragon, there's a lot more like subtlety to it. Like I'm saying, the thing that's causing Rhaenyra to snap is the death of her son. The thing that kind of makes Alicent crown her son is to keep him safe.
Yeah.
I feel like, because there's a few moments throughout where that I feel like that's what she's trying to do, because like you said, her dad's put it into her head where, like, if Rhaenyra does become queen, then your kids are out. Like, there's that a great moment where there's like a moment of doubt, and she kind of where Alicent kind of goes against her dad. That's when he disappears on his wee hiatus for a while. And she's on Rhaenyra's side, and then it just kind of spirals out of control. And I've lost the absolute thread of my point, but but yeah, I feel like you were saying, that the best way to say it for me is that the characters in that are a lot more like nuanced in House of the Dragon. One of the things as well, I feel like I'm potentially in the minority, but weirdly enough, I prefer that there's not like huge battles and things in House of the Dragon, because like that's just not my cup of tea. I just find it quite boring. I feel like maybe I'm the boring one, where I enjoy like watching people chat more than I enjoy watching a big battle. But I feel like House of Dragon's got like a nice a bit more of a balance in that.
Well, I think the implication or threat or impending threat of violence is more interesting than the violence itself.
Yeah, I mean, like, everyone, like, Game of Thrones was good for its gory violence at times, which was fun to watch at times, but it became a bit of a cliche within it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's time yet for...
great, Game of Thrones is doing action again.
Yeah, I feel like obviously there's time yet for House of the Dragon to do that. But I do like this kind of emphasis on the sneakiness. Do you know what I mean? Like the scheming and things like that. But so yeah, that's kind of. I think that the main thing I would take away from it is that, as it stands at the moment, with one season of House of the Dragon and 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, I am preferring House of the Dragon. So yeah, moving on. One of the things that House of the Dragon does that Game of Thrones doesn't really do is there was, I think, 2 moments in the show where there are like time jumps, and one of them obviously is a fair amount of time, and some of the characters were recast, or not recast, they were just cast older, so it was different actors. So what were your kind of initial thoughts on the time jumps themselves, like how they worked? And for you, do you feel like it was even necessary to recast the actors, or do you think it helped?
I think the time jump thing was really interesting because like it was almost like after every episode there was a time jump. There was like maybe 1 or 2 instances where the next episode picked up like pretty quickly after the next one. Usually there was like months, if not years, usually years between episodes, and I was really disorientating. Like it was a weird thing to kind of like constantly like adjust to, because you were like, oh, like, you know, there's been a jump, and obviously they do change the actors, they change some of the actors, but it's like halfway through, and not, you know, they don't do it every single time. So it's a bit disorienting because the show has to tell you there's been a time jump every time. You don't just see it, which I think is one of the things that, you know, it's hard to do that. You know, you put loads of makeup in the characters. Like, how do you show that? How do you communicate that effectively? And you kind of can't until you obviously do the recast.
That it's such a good way to like signify time jumps as haircuts. But they swing wildly because like some TV shows and movies will have like someone has short hair and then it's long hair, and then other, like, I'm thinking of the movie Atonement in particular, we've spoken about it before, where she's got that same haircut like throughout her entire life. And I feel like Game of Thrones, one of the things they do to the actors that haven't been recast is that they change their hair, and they're like, time has passed, clearly.
The butterfly effect's another one where like Ashton Kutcher's character just has the exact same hairstyle at every age, so that you know that it's his character. And it's a trope that I do find funny when it's like that's how you know that it's like a flashback, because the character has exactly the same hair.
Yeah.
I much prefer it when it's like, oh, there's been a time jump and people have changed their hair, because people do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very good point actually. But the hair style changing. But yeah, no, I think it's a very unique thing. Like, it's not something that shows often do, and it kind of is difficult to. It is a bit uncomfortable every time it does it, because you do have to like reorient yourself every time. But it obviously did really widen the scope of the story, and it managed to do it in a way, because it's funny, because like obviously one of the things that Game of Thrones is criticised for, especially in the end, is like characters just like fast travelling, and they kind of, they do that in Game of Thrones. They did it with space, and this one they're doing it with time, where they like keep jumping across time between the episodes. But because it's woven into the structure of the show, it does it a lot more effectively. And yeah, I think it's again another ballsy thing for the show to do, but I think it did actually work. And like, now that I've seen the whole first season, I think like they did a really good job, and I do think the recast, it did help sell just how much time had passed.
Yeah.
And I think it was again a really risky thing to do, to just like throw out your two sort of main actors halfway through, especially because they were.
It was at the halfway point, wasn't it? It was after episode 5, I think.
Yeah, it was. So quite a nice clean break, but yeah, to recast your two like leads basically, and I think it did a really good job of. Obviously, they recast the kids a couple of times, and that one's easier because the kids aren't as like major characters. But yeah, like, I think it worked. I think it really contributed to the scale. I think it's part of what made it actually such a good season, because it did feel like by the end of the last episode, it did feel like a lot had happened, and a lot had like, you did believe that there'd been a huge amount of time between like episode 1 and episode 10. It almost felt like a different show in a really good way. So yeah, no, I think it worked, and I think they did a really good job in particular with, like you mentioned before, I was thinking it was the other day, like the first scene where you're introduced to the new Rhaenyra is obviously her giving birth, but it's all done in like one really long take. And I was reading about this before, and they actually built like a 3-story castle set so they could do this one take where like she gives birth and then she has to like go and see the queen with the kid. And it's such a good way of like, really being like, okay, like I don't know, it felt really cleverly constructed to win you over to this new actress, or this new actor, and really have you be like, okay, do you know what, this is the same character. There is a change. They do feel different, but I'm on board with it. Like it was a cool way of just like meeting it face on and doing a really cool, like, again, it was I thought a nice way of using like actual filmmaking as well to kind of like almost like win you over. What did you think?
I appreciate that they clearly didn't want to hang about. They had a story they wanted to tell in a specific time frame, so I do appreciate that it wasn't like long and drawn out, and I feel like the kind of absence of the time jumps presented, that kind of period where we didn't really know what had happened, was really interesting, because then because a lot of the time it would have been just kind of needless information, and I think it's a lot more interesting for the, like, especially like Viserys's kids to Alicent Hightower, like, to see the way that they progress as well, especially like they've kind of grown up. They've got that thing where they're not really heirs, but they've got kind of someone whispering in their ear like, well, maybe you should be the king, blah blah blah. So that was, and he's obviously like out of control. He's just living the life because he knows he's pretty much like an heir, but he doesn't have any of the responsibilities of like the actual heir would have. I feel like you were saying, sometimes they felt quite almost like sporadic, maybe would be the word, where they were just kind of like the amount of time that passed wasn't set, so it seemed quite like random at times. Yeah. And I feel like there was obviously when they did recast, I mean, we've spoken about it in this podcast, like the names are quite similar and different, so I felt like you did spend a wee bit of time at the start to be like, who's that again? But saying that, I feel like they did so well with the casting that, like, the the younger and older versions looked like each other. Do you know what I mean? Like you could tell
Yeah.
that's who the character was. And yeah, I feel like seeing them as the kind of younger actors, it definitely helped with like actual just character development when you saw them as adults, because it felt like you had experienced them grown up.
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting way of doing it.
Like all the Harry Potter movies in one go.
Exactly. I love though that there was certain characters for obvious reasons that they didn't recast, Matt Smith being one of them.
Yeah.
Like, he's a big name, we need to keep him here.
Yeah, I wonder if he like now writes that into his contract. Will not recast me.
Exactly. And so yeah, I feel like it did work. Like you're saying, it's such an interesting thing for like a show to do, for that to become something that show does. Do you know what I mean? Like, but not in a weird kind of like sci-fi type way, if that makes sense. So yeah, I do think it. I think it definitely. I feel like one of the benefits from it was that we got two sets of like great actors. Do you know what I mean? We got to see them both, and there was a moment after the first 5, like just when the time jump happened, and I was like almost upset that we wouldn't be seeing the young Rhaenyra again, because she was so good. But then again, so was the older Rhaenyra, and Alison Hightower. She was amazing. So yeah, basically the last thing to kind of wrap up our discussion, we wanted to talk about kind of like there's been a lot of like almost like controversy and things like that around the show and different actors in the show and casting implications and reasons and things like that. So Sam, I'll let you just jump right in. You had one that you wanted to kind of mention and discuss. It wasn't one that I had actually seen. I mean, I'm not on Twitter, so that could be why my ear's not to the ground with things like this. But
it's a weird one, because I saw it and then without I didn't look for it, and it just kind of came up on my feed and I read it, and then I actually tried to find out more recently, like on that thread, and couldn't really. So I don't know if it was just like a overreaction thing, or I couldn't find that much to substantiate it, basically. But it still is an interesting talking point. But I basically read someone saying that it seemed like Emma Darcy, who plays the older Rhaenyra, because they're non-binary, they're trans, that they had been sort of like left out of a lot of like promotional stuff, and they weren't being interviewed in the same way that other cast members were. They weren't getting the sort of spotlight that they should for being like the the main actor. Yeah, they were cast first as well, like before.
I read that somewhere.
So like they weren't getting. It just felt like they weren't getting the sort of attention that they maybe should be getting, and that some of the cast members were getting. And there was there was this sort of thinking that maybe it's because they're trans. I think there was even talk of them not being like them not having the same like merchandising like deals and stuff, and again I'm not actually sure, but I guess the interesting thing is like I think the most like prolific thing that one of the reasons people have talked a lot about them, and I think the most like prolific thing that's come around them is that like was it the Negroni Spagliato TikTok thing, where like that's kind of like there was like loads of people talking about that, but that I've not really seen many interviews. I did read an interview that they gave talking about the show. I read a couple, but don't seem to be tons, to be fair. But I also don't know how much that might have been their choice, because they did say, I think in one of the interviews I read, did seem like they were kind of like they'd said they were not caught off guard by like how all the press, but it is something that they admitted. They were like, you kind of need to adjust. Yeah, like it's not an easy thing to just suddenly like have that big a spotlight on you.
Do you know what's awful as well? I was reading things about like casting, and when it was announced that they would be cast as Rhaenyra, people are just horrific. They were like saying things like, "Oh, I don't know why they would be cast as Rhaenyra, because Rhaenyra's meant to be gorgeous, and Rhaenyra's meant to be like just this absolute stunning beauty, and look who they've cast." I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like,
I know.
Do you know what I mean? Like, apart from anything else, it's just like, I don't know. It's just like such a weird thing to be hateful about. Like,
Yeah.
I think when I was kind of looking into what you were saying about them, there was a lot of speculation. Like, if you see pictures of them at the moment, their hair's quite short and cropped, and they've just got a very specific style and things like that. And I think a lot of people were maybe just seeing that and forgetting that hair and makeup and costuming exists.
Yeah, look at Matt Smith's great wigs.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Matt Smith doesn't look like that. Poor Paddy doesn't look like that. His face is intact. As shocking as that may be to hear. Yeah, I think it's just stuff like that's ridiculous. Another thing that I read when I was kind of looking into stuff like that was that there was a lot of controversy around the fact that Lord Corliss's character was played by a black actor, and people were livid. Like, the point that people were making was that the Targaryens and were they Valyrians? Yeah. That they were like related. Basically, they're both from Old Valyria, so they would look similar. But the Song of Ice and Fire is such a funny place because within both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, it's kind of established that somehow hair colour is the strongest gene.
Yeah.
Like,
that's a very good point, actually.
Yeah, like, it happens in Game of Thrones where that's how Ned figures out that Joffrey's a bastard, do you know what I mean? Because he's going through the book and he's like, oh, black of hair. And then
the hair don't lie.
Yeah, hair don't lie. And then you that's one of the reasons there's that amazing moment with Alicent when she sees that their new baby for the first time, and she makes a comment like, maybe soon you'll get one that looks like you. Obviously the Rhaenyra's children have very dark hair, and then her children with Daemon have the Targaryen hair. So like, what does it matter if the actor playing them is black, as long as they have that ridiculous white wig, then we're gonna know who they are. Like, it doesn't matter. But,
literally, like, I don't think there was a single point that like pulled me. You know, at no point was I like, whoa.
Yeah,
like,
it can't possibly be a Valyrian.
yeah, it literally didn't cross my mind. Like, you just accept it. Mm-hmm. Again, I think I've spoken about this before. I think I've spoken about this before. Maybe I've not. It's a really, really, really weird point to bring up in this context. But so the movie Kung Fu Panda,
amazing.
The thing I really like those movies, all three of them. Great trilogy.
Favorite trilogy. Up there with the Godfather and.
Well, I like it more in the Godfather trilogy by quite a lot. Yeah, like, one of the things I love in the first one, and the one thing I don't like about the trilogy, I do like what they do with it, like, overall, but one thing that I didn't like about the second one was that they confirm that, Jack Black plays Poe as a panda, and his dad's like a bird. His dad's like a crane or a frog or whatever. But I loved in the first one that they have that whole joke about the fact that they're not the same species, and they even like have a moment in the first one where he goes to say, they set it up as if he's about to say, you're adopted.
Yep.
And then the joke is that obviously he doesn't say that, and I really wish, part of me will forever wish that they just kept it that way and just never explained it. That, like, they just were genetically related but completely different species, because I just found that hilarious. But also, just you watch that movie and you just accept that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's what I mean. Like, these things don't actually matter. It's not just, like, people that get annoyed about these things, it is because they are racist.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, as well, and like, it's based on a book. Like, you're not gonna. It's based that is a character that George R. R. Martin made up in his head. No one is gonna. You're not gonna find someone that looks exactly like who is described in a book. When have you ever watched a movie and thought that's exactly down to the last eyebrow hair what I pictured that person looking like? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's
exactly.
What does it matter? Yeah. It's just casting. If that person does a good enough job, by the way.
Yeah. Exactly. I completely agree.
But yeah, so that was our rambling end point for a Song of Ice and Fire fans who need to just sit down and be quiet.
Yeah, exactly. They need, yeah.
Yeah.
Take some time to get over it.
Exactly. Just you sit in a quiet room somewhere. But yeah, no, Sam, thank you very much. I knew that was going to be a meaty discussion, and I'm glad. I'm kind of glad we've waited this long to talk about Game of Thrones. Obviously, I've been trashing it sporadically throughout the podcast, so it was nice to get more of an outlet.
Really, really get in and start kicking it.
Exactly. But yeah, no, I'm excited for the next season to come out. Excited to see kind of where it goes. And yeah, so thank you again for joining me, Sam. Very interesting points, as always.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
No worries. And we shall see you guys next time for it'll be my last concept podcast of the year, and then we'll have Sam's couple to round off the year. So yeah, that'll be exciting.
Yeah.
So yeah, until then, we'll see you guys. See you later.